Awesome. Sweet. Thank you. So let's get things started today. So thanks for coming to this training. We're doing Communications and Marketing 101 here, put on by Midwest Building Decarbonization Coalition. Glad y'all could make it. Our agenda for today, I'm going to go over a couple just like welcomes and introductions here. We do a little bit of like level setting for the coalition, a little background on us if you're not super familiar with our work. And then we're going to jump into some information on branding. We're going to go over one-pagers, social media stuff, and then resources and tools that I think can be helpful for anyone interested in communications and especially digital communications. And over this whole overview today, it's pretty high level, kind of 101, just like introducing different ideas. And I will pause for questions kind of at the end of each section. But if you have any questions throughout the presentation, totally feel free to put those in the chat or the Q&A. I've got like the screen share going here too, so I'll try to be able to manage it all, but Marnice is able to help me out and flag any of those questions if I miss them. So feel free to drop those in at any time during our presentation. And then also, since we are in a webinar format, folks are not able to unmute themselves, but you can use that raise hand thing. It's at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So we'll have time for discussion and feel free to use that raise hand function. And then I can go ahead and take you off mute so we can be a little more interactive today. So a little bit about Midwest BDC. If you're not familiar with our work, our mission is to develop and implement equitable strategies to achieve zero emissions from the Midwestern building sector by 2050. And the region that we define as the Midwest includes Michigan, Minnesota, Illinois, Wisconsin, Ohio, Missouri, Indiana, and Iowa. So that's our little state region there. And these are some of the community norms that we practice when we are together in this space. So I'll go ahead and read them off quickly, but feel free to follow along on the screen. And then these are also available on our website under resources if you're interested in revisiting these or adopting them into one of your own spaces. So we follow notice intent, lean towards impact, use I statements, assume good intentions, on screen, off screen. This applies more to our meeting spaces, but pretty much just says that, we have no requirement for folks to be on camera or off camera, kind of just whatever you feel comfortable with. We love to see your faces, but we understand that not everyone can do that all the time. So then we also practice self-awareness, wait, why am I talking or why aren't I talking? Practice active listening, stop and witness, listen for understanding, not to respond, recognize that everyone's a teacher and everyone's a learner, share the responsibility for keeping to these norms, adhere to speak next indicators. So that's either stack or raise hands, kind of what that means. Once we get discussion going, it's hard sometimes on Zoom to like unmute and not speak over each other. So we like to either use that raise hand functions, and then myself or one of our other facilitators will just call on people in that order, or you can go ahead and type stack in the chat and that just kind of like stacks you in that order to speak next. Then we appreciate it when folks show up as your authentic self, speak to the whole group, minimize the use of jargon or explain the terms when you're asked. Especially our decarb work can get really technical sometimes, we know, so that just makes it a little bit more inclusive for everyone if they're maybe not familiar with certain technical terms. And then participate and lean into discomfort. And then up next, we like to center ourselves in these meetings and webinars with an Indigenous land acknowledgement. Again, this is on our website, but I'll just go ahead and read it off the screen here. So let's pause for a moment to contemplate an Indigenous land and enslaved peoples. We have to start with honesty. Land acknowledgement is a traditional custom dating back centuries for many Native communities and nations. For non-Indigenous communities, land acknowledgement is a way of showing respect and honoring the Indigenous peoples of the land on which we work and live. The Indigenous Land and Enslaved Peoples Acknowledgement. We invite you to recognize the written histories of the United States, specifically Midwestern states, as fractured. Let us acknowledge then that we are currently on the land of the Indigenous, who continue to be systematically erased by policies and practices that remove their histories from this place. Let us honor the enslaved people who built the wealth and the foundation of the United States. Let us recognize the histories of the United States as complicit within the racism of white supremacy. We recognize that these difficult histories persist in present day racial realities and privileges within our movement of building decarbonization. We commit to dismantling racism in the spaces where we work. We invite you to work beside us to create change. And then one other kind of level setting that we like to do here, we try to embody and practice the Hermes principles for democratic organizing in all of our work in the coalition space. And these principles are be inclusive, an emphasis on bottom-up organizing, letting people speak for themselves, working together in solidarity and mutuality, building just relationships among ourselves, and a commitment to self-transformation. All right, and so with that, we will transition into kind of the meat of this presentation here. So we're going to be talking a lot about communications and branding, kind of why they're important, what this work really is, and then ways that we can all like practice it. I know a lot of folks involved and who are members of the coalition, have either their own community groups that they're really active in, maybe even their own LLCs, own small businesses. So a lot of this work in communications can be applied to all of those things. It can be applied to any of your own projects, or it's also just good to know, good to be aware of, and stuff like that. So I'll take a moment here and ask folks if you want to drop in the chat, maybe your name, where you're coming from, anything that you're like particularly interested in. I'll be able to hopefully hit on those things then throughout the presentation. Maybe if it's not baked into the presentation, we'll have time for Q&A and discussion at the end, so I could speak to it then if I know anything about it. But I can start off. My name is Maggie Heiser. I'm the communications manager here at Midwest BDC. I've been on the team since August of this year, so fairly new to this role. Previously, I've worked in communications for another environmental nonprofit in Ohio, where I'm from, and I'm based in the Columbus, Ohio area. And I just a little bit more background, I guess. I went to school for communications work. I've always just thought it was really interesting. It's actually not something I kind of thought I would be in until I was in college and I took a class and just thought it was really interesting, kind of like the whole, I guess, like mental underpinning of it all. Like this stuff is so present in all of our lives, like communications, branding, marketing. We see it all the time, but it's almost something that goes a little bit unnoticed. So I just thought it was super interesting, and have been kind of in this field of work ever since. So a little bit about me, but like I said, feel free to use the chat if you want to introduce yourself and say something you're interested in learning about during our time together today. So that kind of kicks us off. In communications, so like broad level, what is communications? Why is it important? I think communications is really key to a lot of our work. So your organization, your group, your job, whatever, you could be doing some awesome work, but unless you are able to share that out widely, a lot of people just will never know about it, which is, it can be frustrating because it's like I'm doing this great work. The people I'm involved with on a day-to-day can see it and appreciate it and support it, but kind of spreading that message out to the larger population can be hard unless you're actively working at doing these communication tools that we'll talk about here. So a lot of communications work these days focuses on digital outreach. And that's kind of what my presentation here is centered around. Obviously, communication as a whole thing, it's like every conversation we have with people, we're communicating, obviously. And it's like, in terms of the work stuff, every conversation we have is an opportunity to connect people back to our work. If I'm in the coffee shop and just chatting about someone, that question of like, oh, what do you do? That comes up a lot. But then especially when we're working in a like nonprofit field that's mission driven. So if we're worried about the environment, health, economic burden, energy burden on folks, these are conversations that are happening all the time. At least for me, like, among my friends, among my community members, around people I'm with a lot. So those opportunities are always a chance to bring people into this work, to be like, oh, hey, I'm, associated with this coalition. We do a lot of cool stuff about decarbonization. Have you heard of that? Like, do you know what it is? But like I said, that's like broad level communication. So a lot of what what we're going to talk about today, though, is more on digital outreach tools. The internet is a huge resource to connect people who have common interests. So that's kind of what we're going to be focusing on today. So, like I said, what even is communications? When it comes to careers and kind of communications as like a job work field, a lot of times that refers to, running a website, posting on social media for an organization, writing, designing and printing materials, whether they're pamphlets, one pagers, newsletters going out in the mail, filming videos, strategizing campaigns, maintaining databases. Can be a lot of different stuff. But all of these kind of different aspects of communications or different tools come together to hopefully create like one solid brand. So all of these different things, whether it's like your website, your social media, your pamphlets you're getting out there in communities, hanging up on that bulletin board at a community center or a church or something like that. These all kind of work together and hopefully point back to one thing, which is your brand. So next slide, a little bit more about branding. Nonprofit branding refers to the process that builds a visual identity for a nonprofit to help people recognize the organization and its mission and to influence how people perceive the messages from that nonprofit. So there's a lot of different facets of this. We're just going to touch on a couple of them. Like I said, kind of high level here. So brand image is how anyone involved outside of your nonprofit sees you. So brand image is how your volunteers, donors, and general public perceive your nonprofit organization. So brand image is something that you don't have the most control over. It's how your community members, your folks out in the general public kind of perceive you. But brand identity is the visible elements of your brand, including like color, design, logo, website, social media graphics, all that stuff that you do have your control over there. So brand image is like, if I'm going out and talking about Midwest BDC to someone who's never heard of it before, their image of Midwest BDC will be heavily influenced by kind of just like my first conversation with them. Until then, maybe they join the website, they get on our social media, and then all of those things start to impact their view of who Midwest BDC is. So kind of just in general, brand image, we have a little bit less control over, but brand identity, we have a lot of control over as communications professionals. And so why is branding even important? A lot of these things feel very cerebral, very high level, like we were just talking about. You can't really control all of it all the time. So why is it important to even try to, essentially? Well, branding helps to stand out from other nonprofit organizations, and then it also creates a relationship with your audience. An audience is a term that can be, members, general public, colleagues, folks who are in this work and perceiving Midwest BDC's work, essentially. But it helps build that loyalty and trust. So a strong brand can help you to raise more money, by donations, increase social awareness of your cause or your mission. And then it also helps out in building a reputation. So a recognizable and consistent brand helps you, like we just said, to stand out, build loyalty and trust, and then also helps with like engagement and fundraising campaigns. And so I think that something interesting here is that loyalty and trust. So like, what does it really mean to trust a brand, to trust an organization? I think a lot of that comes from repetition. First of all, it's like if someone gets more familiar with your brand, with Midwest BDC, they know what to expect from us. They know the work that we do. They know just like who we are, as an organization. And then that helps in terms of like knowing when to come to us for certain things, for help, for advice, for collaboration versus another organization that might be able to serve them better in that time. So that loyalty and trust piece is just something that I think is really interesting. And that kind of consistent message, consistent branding really helps out in building that. So we're going to take a little minute here and watch this video. It's about 5 minutes long. I think it's really interesting. This is all about branding and kind of how branding like really works in your brain to create this familiarity and that loyalty and trust we just talked about. They're talking a little bit more about like corporations here who are selling products. They talk about Apple and Samsung phones, and then like Nike and Adidas and stuff like that. So, some of it is a little bit different than the more nonprofit mission driven work that we're mostly speaking about, but I think a lot of the general ideas can still be applied. So I'm going to play this video, and then you guys let me know. I'm going to make sure the sound works. Sometimes I know it can be kind of funky when you're playing a video on Zoom. So I think we have that set up correctly. Okay, cool. Just drop a link or drop a message in the chat if you guys cannot hear this, but hopefully it'll work.
Coke is just soda. Tylenol just.
Maggie, not anymore. I did at the beginning.
National consumer was willing to pay more.
Is it working then when I unmute it? Unmute myself.
For exactly the same thing. We love to think about ourselves as rational. That's not how it works. A very famous study done by colleagues at Duke University had flashed either the Apple logo or the IBM logo to two randomized groups of participants.
The study found that after being subliminally exposed to the Apple logo, compared to when you've been exposed to the IBM logo, participants performed better on creative tasks.
And the argument is that Apple has been telling you this story over and over again, that Apple is the brand for hip, cool, fun, creative people.
This is the true power of brands. They can influence our behavior in ways that extend way beyond the point of sale. So, to what degree can the influence of brands wreak havoc on our ability to make rational spending decisions? This is Your Brain on Money. This is Americus Reed. He studies identity and marketing at the University of Pennsylvania.
When I make choices about different brands, I'm choosing to create an identity. When I put that shirt on, when I put those shoes on, those jeans, that hat, someone is going to form an impression about what I'm about. So if I'm choosing Nike over Under Armour, I'm choosing a kind of different way to express affiliation with sport. The Nike thing is about performance. The Under Armour thing is about the underdog. I have to choose which of these different conceptual pathways is most consistent with where I am in my life.
And once a consumer makes that choice, their relationship with a brand can deepen to the point where they identify with the brand like family. And once you identify with a brand, it can shape the way you behave.
And it's really interesting because they will also, if someone talks bad about that product, brand, or service, they will be the first to go out and defend. Why? Because an attack on the brand is an attack on themselves.
Michael Platt is a professor of neuroscience, marketing, and psychology whose research demonstrates how our perception of brands influences our decisions.
There's an idea in marketing, which is that we relate to brands in the same way we relate to people. It's like, I love this brand, or I hate this brand. Of course, what people say, right, can often be different from what's really going on in their heads. So we thought, well, why don't we just ask the brain directly?
Michael and his team observed the brains of iPhone users and Samsung Galaxy users with an MRI machine while they heard good, bad, and neutral news about Apple and Samsung.
Apple customers showed a brain empathy response toward Apple. It was exactly what you'd see in the way you would respond to somebody in your own family.
Strangely, Samsung users didn't have any positive or negative responses when good or bad news was released about their brand. The only evidence that Samsung users showed was reverse empathy for Apple news, meaning if the Apple headline was negative, their brain reflected a positive response.
You know, it really shows us that Apple has completely defined the market here. Samsung customers, it seems from their brain data, are only buying Samsung because they hate Apple.
The kicker? The Samsung users didn't report feeling the results their MRIs showed. What was happening in their brains and what they reported feeling towards Apple and Samsung were totally different.
Most people just don't realize that they are subconsciously choosing brands because those brands have some kind of self-expressive value.
You can see there's a lot of power here in terms of shaping consumers' decisions. As we learn more and more about that, we had to think much more deeply about the ethical, legal, and societal implications of doing that.
So as consumers, what can we do to make informed choices? Well, the best thing we can do is be aware of the influence that brands hold.
I think it's important to always pause and think a little bit about, okay, why am I buying this product?
And like it or not, brands aren't going anywhere.
I've heard lots of people push back and say that I'm not into brands. I take a very different view. They're not doing anything any different than what someone who affiliates with a brand is doing. They have a brand. It's just an anti-brand brand. I think about what is it that I've learned about identity over time. I think a lot of it has to do with the fundamental need that we as humans have to have support systems. Perhaps it was the church, it was the community, it was these other institutions that existed. Now brands have stepped in as pillars of our identity. So I'm very much motivated to see that in that positive light.
All right, sweet. So like I said, that video, they kind of talk more about the corporations, about like buying things, which is not as much what we're focused on. But I think the whole aspect of how like deeply ingrained these familiar brands are in our brains is just super interesting, and really goes to show how like a strong brand really can like establish itself in someone's life, in someone's mind, as a trustworthy source, a go-to. He said that they like the same thing went off in their brain as like viewing family as this brand. So just all that goes to show kind of how strong these things can be when they're working together to create like a really strong brand identity. So one of the main things that you first see of any brand is a logo. So your organization's logo is going to be, like I said, one of the most common things your supporters see. Ideally, it should be present everywhere. So if you've been to a lot of Midwest BDC webinars or trainings, you'll notice that a lot of our slides include our logo in the bottom corner. A lot of our graphics, advertising, these trainings and our work on social media include that logo. And so it's kind of just this like repetition, repetition, repetition. Anytime you see our work, anytime you're on our website, hopefully you're seeing this logo. So then it just begins to, ring a bell in your brain, tie you to it, and just become a reminder of who we are. So this like larger photo shows a lot of different nonprofit logos. And I thought it would be fun here if you want to drop in the chat something that you see that they have in common, a lot of them, maybe something different that you notice in some of them, but not others. I know that just for me looking at them, a lot of times that name of the organization is fully spelled out, just like how in our logo it is, Midwest Building Decarbonization Coalition, so that kind of exactly what these groups are all about. So we see that in, for example, Wild Montana. I've never heard of Wild Montana as an organization, but I have a pretty good idea of what they do. Something in Montana and something with probably like nature, keeping the land wild. It kind of looks like mountains there. So we get that from them. And then another one maybe like New England Forestry Foundation. Again, I'm not familiar with that group, but it gives me a good idea of where they're located, focused on forestry. And then, they've got that logo that just kind of implies that again with like the leaves sprouting out of it, the green. And so I think you can see that also, hopefully, in the Midwest BDC logo. So even if you've never heard of the Midwest Building Decarbonization Coalition, hopefully that logo kind of communicates, all right, we're in the Midwest. We're focused on building decarbonization. If you don't know what that means, which no shame, I didn't know what that meant. First time I came across Midwest BDC, you see the plug, you see the windmills, we're talking about renewable energy here. You see the buildings coming out of that plug. We're talking about homes, apartments, stuff like that. So really getting a logo that can convey those things. And, it's kind of funny because when you look at any of these logos, usually you're not breaking it down like that in your mind. This is kind of just an exercise to do that, to call out those certain things. But I feel like most of the time it's really more subliminal. You might just think like, oh yeah, I know what that's about because of the logo. But when you break it down, there are multiple things that are, you know, directly making you have that association. So next thing we're talking about in terms of brand is the brand voice. So you've got your logo, you know, that's kind of like your little capsule of what your brand is all about. One of the next things that you might be thinking about is your brand voice. So this is something that is made up of like who you are, you know, who your organization is, what your mission is, what your values are, kind of what makes you unique, what makes you stand out, and then who your audience is, and how can you really communicate, you know, directly with your audience. So essentially your voice is not necessarily what you say, but how you say it. So here's where we get kind of, you know, ideas of brands that are maybe really like science backed, super technical, very like direct. Or we can also have brands that are kind of like playful and fun, but maybe a little bit more casual, a little bit more authentic is a word that we hear a lot about in communications. So having that consistent brand voice helps you stand out from the crowd, build that consistency, build that recognition, and build trust with members and stakeholders. Kind of those things we talked about in the other branding slide as well. Those are like really the points we want to hit on here. And I saw Gregory dropped in the chat on the logos piece that the name gives you a reason to check out the organization. That's exactly right. Like having something right away that you could think, okay, wait, I'm a little bit interested in this. I'm just going to Google the name. There you go. Like now you're on the website. Now you've got their social media. It's all just kind of like, hopefully, you know, bringing your audience into your work. So that's, yeah, exactly right. So kind of going off of that too, in this work, we have to know who our audience is and then also who we want to bring in. So who our audience isn't, essentially. So these are just some kind of, you know, different groups I was thinking about when I was wondering who Midwest BDC's audience is. So we have people who are interested in environmental advocacy, maybe members of government, engineers, people interested in housing, health and wellness, you know, people passionate about social justice at large, housing developers, decarbonization experts, but then also people who've never heard about decarbonization. So I think this is a really useful exercise when you're thinking about not only who your audience currently is, but who you kind of want it to be. It really helps shape how you want to appeal to different groups. So something like decarbonization, but I think this goes for just about any mission-driven nonprofit. You know, there are different reasons why different people are interested in your work and want to be involved in your work. So for example, people who are interested in health and wellness, those are folks that we bring into decarbonization by really focusing on the negative health effects of gas stoves and the positive health effects that electrification can bring to your indoor air quality. That's where we pull out those important statistics about, like, as Americans, 90% of our time is spent indoors, and your indoor air quality is super important to your health. So that's like a message we would use for that audience. And then maybe people, you know, housing developers, we would have a different message for them. That could be more about like, you know, this is the future of where like housing is going. Don't you kind of want to be in on that for the economic benefits of it, for the IRA benefits, like all those different things. So we might not use the exact same kind of hook message for those different audiences, but hopefully, you know, we would make that message specific to them and then bring them into the larger conversation where you kind of have more time then to fit all these puzzle pieces together and really explain how it all does work together. So just an example there on different audiences. And I think that's something that's really important to keep in mind, especially if you are the communications professional who's making those graphics, doing that outreach, running the social media account. It's important to think of who you already have in the room and then who you want to bring into the room. And so that kind of overview on branding brings us to a resource that I think is really helpful, which is a brand toolkit. So a brand toolkit helps you have one place where you can go for when you're designing anything, print stuff, digital stuff, anything like that. This is kind of your go-to. It creates strong, cohesive, and recognizable branding. And a brand toolkit also helps you get others up to speed quickly. So if you are, employed and have someone else join your communications team, you can be like, hey, I have this resource for you, jump on in essentially. And so some things that are important to include if you do want to make a brand toolkit are logos, typography, so the different fonts you're going to use, your color palette, and then anything like I like to have a couple mission statements, slogans, a little like pieces that point back to that voice and tone we were talking about earlier. So an example here is Midwest BDC's brand toolkit. This is something I put together after I was hired and joined the coalition as a communications manager. So like how I said in the last slide, it's kind of just like a one-stop shop for anything communications related that I'm going to be designing. It's really helpful with those design pieces. So as you can see up top, we've got Midwest Building Decarbonization Coalition. Here are our logos that we're often using. So this is also, I think it shows just like how easy this is for design then. So it's like, oh, okay, I need to put the logo on something. I know exactly where to go to find that in this brand toolkit, which I just have saved, digitally on my computer. Here are the different fonts that I often use. This is a piece where that kind of consistency comes into play. It doesn't, for the most part, what font you use is not going to make someone either check out your brand or not check out your brand. It's like usually not that make or break, but building this consistency into all of our work we do, it just really makes it easier then to like put things together, put presentations together. I know that this will all match. I know it'll all be seamless if we are using these same fonts every time. And then same with the color palette there. And then these little codes are like the color selector. So if I'm in Canva or if I'm in Photoshop, I can just copy and paste that little string of text and have that exact same color pop up. So then here are like some icons we use a lot, just kind of like this basic vibe. And then here are some of those mission and slogan pieces. So mission, like we saw at the top of this presentation, Midwest BDC seeks to develop and implement equitable strategies to achieve zero emissions from the Midwestern building sector by 2050. Another little slogan below that. And then this is kind of, what makes us different. You could say this is values, very similar thing right there, but these are just kind of things that I want to make sure when I'm doing our communications that I'm grounding our work in. So that's our equity first approach, our commitment to environmental, climate, and racial justice, democratic bottom-up organizing, and then our re-granting to community organizations, kind of that like community first piece there as well. And then just those quick links to midwestdecarb.org and Midwest BDC. So I'm pretty sure we're going to transition into digital accessibility next. So wanted to pause quickly right here if there are any questions on these pieces we talked about so far. So like the brand toolkit, branding in general, audiences, anything like that. I'm just going to make a little space for questions before we move on.
If you have any questions, please put them in the chat.
Yes, you can also do that raise hand function if you want to come off of mute, and we can let you speak to the group that way. And if not, no worries. We can always take questions at the end too. We'll have a little bit more time for more open discussion. So feel free to drop those into the chat whenever if you have them. All right, and not seeing any, so we'll just go ahead and move on now to digital accessibility. So this is something I wanted to make sure we were talking about, especially when talking about those branding pieces. So digital accessibility is essentially the idea of making your digital work, so your graphics, your website, your social media posts, as accessible for everyone, regardless of their ability. So one of the terms you hear a lot here is inclusive design, which is the belief that creating buildings, products, or environments to make them accessible to all people, regardless of age, disability, or any other factors. So when we're in our communications work, that looks like adding alternative text to images that you're posting on social media or on your website, ensuring that you have a high contrast ratio in those graphics you're creating, making sure you're captioning your videos whenever possible, testing your website with a screen reader tool, and just being intentional in your work to make it as accessible for folks who may not be able to see as well, may not be able to hear as well, who are using those screen reader tools to make their experience online easier for them. So we have an example here of the graphic. You probably saw this if you're at this training because this was our graphic that we used to advertise it. So this one here has that high contrast ratio. So obviously, you know, we've got the black text off of the white background, really easy to read. This one over here, it does not have that same contrast ratio, but it still follows the color palette in our brand toolkit. So, you know, this is something that might make sense to create if you're just going off of the brand toolkit, but it's a lot harder to read. It's a lot harder for me to read, and especially folks who may be colorblind, may not have as good vision. This could be really difficult for them to just catch at first glance. So not only is it less accessible, it's also just like not as good of a graphic because it doesn't really pop off the page and make the information just like really easy to gather on first glance. And then at the bottom of the screen here, I have an example of alternative text. So when you're posting on social media, this is something that you could insert into the image. So if someone is using a screen reader, it will read this text for them if they're not able to see the graphic itself. So really what alternative text is just a like pretty cut and dry description of what the image reads. So here we have like, you know, the graphic has these swirls on the left side. It reads Communications and Marketing 101. Those details are there. And then it includes a photo of Maggie, who's leading the training, and the Midwest Building Decarbonization Coalition logo at the bottom of the graphic. And something I like to do to make this just easy is when I'm creating a graphic like this, I will just go ahead and write this text out one time, save it in a Google Doc, and then when I'm posting on our social media channels, it's a really easy copy and paste to just insert it into there that way. So it's not something that you have to like, you know, type out every time. And there are a lot of tools and resources that really help you as a communications professional make this accessibility easier for folks. So that there are like, even on Zoom, there's an automatic caption function. It doesn't capture everything perfectly all the time, but you know, it's a good first step. So when you're creating videos and stuff, you can run it through, run your video through one of those automatic caption functions, and then go back in and just make sure everything's okay. But and you know, tweak and edit things that might be a little bit off, but it's a good first step and a lot of help there. So next up, we are going to be talking about one-pagers. So one-pagers are like a quick, you know, messaging at a glance is what I set up here. So a one-pager is a brief overview of your organization, product, or service. Used as marketing material, one-pagers illustrate what your business is about or display your product or service information on a single page. It's like a one-page pitch. So just like, you know, basic information that people can get about your organization. And so studies have shown that the average person's attention span is only 8 seconds long, which is like incredibly short. So one-pagers are a good tool to get people interested, but you have to make sure you're thinking about that. Like, how am I going to get people hooked right away? Their attention spans are so short. If I am, you know, at an event tabling and I only have 8 seconds to really bring someone in, I want to make sure that piece of paper in front of me is catchy and going to pull their attention in right away. So like I say here, you don't need to lay out everything your organization does. You just want to get that reader hooked. You want to get their intention, you know, give them then that one pager and they'll be able to peruse it in their own time. Hopefully check out your website and check out your social media then, and that'll kind of start to bring them in. So they can be used digitally, you know, on your website or shared in emails or on social media, or like I said, physically printed out to have at community events, to have at meetings, to tack onto the bulletin board at your church or at your community center or anything like that. And this kind of points to also how we spoke about our different audiences earlier. So keep your audience in mind when making these one-pagers, and it could change, what information you're going to highlight on that one-pager. So on the next slide, I have images of 2 different Midwest BDC one-pagers. And I want to do a little brainstorm session. If people could drop in the chat, do you think that one looks better for digital versus print? Do they appeal to different audiences? They're 2 different one-pagers, both for Midwest BDC. So I think it would be cool to see if off the bat we can kind of identify any differences in here. So I'll pause for just a minute if people want to drop any observations that they're seeing in the chat. That'd be awesome. All right, we got Linda coming through. Less is best, prefers the youth design on the left. So this is a design that we put together with our youth working group, and totally agree, Linda, especially for that kind of like attention span thing we talked about, 8 seconds. Here we've got like in really big letters, Midwest BDC. What is our mission? What is decarbonization? Just the basics. And then Dr. Pressey calling out that they do appeal to different audiences, which I think is totally true too. So on the next slide, we'll talk about some of those differences between these 2. So thank you guys for putting your thoughts in the chat. So this one, which is the one Linda pointed out that we put together with the youth working group, this is, bold, less information, just kind of like I said, at a glance, real quickly. So best medium, I think for this one is printing. This is a one-pager that printed out at your tabling event, at your bulletin board in real life is going to grab more attention just because there is less text there. It's just the highlights. Best audience, I think here is people who are new to this movement, people who are new to decarbonization. Right there at the top, we have what is decarbonization? It gives that kind of overview. And then best uses for this one, I think, like how we said, tabling, community events, bulletin boards, places where you're, wanting someone to walk away with this piece of paper. And then one other thing I wanted to point out on this one pager, you can see we're using these QR codes for folks, to scan with their phone. This takes them right back to the Midwest BDC website, helps you get more involved with our work. This one highlights this calculator from Rewiring America that shows what you can get from the Inflation Reduction Act. So also on this one pager, I think a great part about it is that we have those next steps, those action items right there for people to be able to take. And so just because that one pager is really catchy and good does not mean that this one also kind of doesn't have its times where it can work as well. So this one pager I think is best for digital. You could use it for print too, but the audience here is really different. I think the audience for this one is folks who are already interested in Midwest BDC. Maybe they're already at a Midwest BDC presentation or meeting. You've already got them hooked, and this is what they're going to use to learn more in depth about what the coalition does. So some of the best uses here are pitches, explanations about our work, emails, introduction emails. I like to include this one pager when I'm reaching out to folks who I think could be interested in the coalition. Maybe we already have something in common. I know they're already interested in electrification work or decarbonization or environmental advocacy in the Midwest. There's already some kind of tie there. So that's when I would include this one and be like, hey, learn about all this work that the coalition is doing and get involved with us that way. But they definitely are different audiences and different kind of intentions there. And then I see Hillary has a question in the chat. Is there any concerns using QR codes? So QR codes, I will say my personal preference is like on this example right here, we have the QR code, but right below it, it also shows exactly where the QR code is taking you, midwestdecarb.org. So the only concern I really have when using QR codes is just the fact that not everybody has a smartphone. You have to be able to have a smartphone that can scan that and take you to it to be able to use it. So if you just have a QR code with no indication of kind of where that's taking you, the folks that don't have smartphones or might not have their phone on them or anything like that, just struggle with that technology, will not be able to, take this home and just Google midwestdecarb.org. So that's my main thing with QR codes. I think they are a really useful tool. A lot of people who do like using them, it's a really easy, just like kind of one tap to take you to the website. But I think it's important to include that other information so that folks who aren't using the QR code can still access, whatever you're trying to share. Did that answer your question, Hillary, about those concerns? Feel free to drop in the chat if not. Awesome, thanks. So with that, we will transition into talking a little bit more about social media. So social media, I'm sure you all know, huge tool, super prevalent, in all of our work these days. So here, I just laid out, and like I said, Comms 101, we're kind of going back to the basics here. So here are a lot of the main platforms that folks are using. We've got Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok. They all kind of have their different audiences, different purposes. YouTube, for example, is where we are posting the recordings of trainings like this one. That's like maybe an hour and a half long sometime. I do not think I would be posting, an hour-long video to Twitter and expecting people to watch it. So there's some stuff like that where it's just differences. TikTok, super new, super it's growing really quickly, but that's all like super short term or short length videos. That's not the place where a longer training like this would live. And so I think a common question, one that I ask myself sometimes is okay, we've got the organization's social media accounts. Well, what do I post on there? So a lot of what we fill out our social accounts with here at Midwest BDC is relevant news and resources for folks, graphics and registration links for events, partner campaigns and events, either resharing those or sharing them ourselves just to get more people involved in what our partners are doing. It's also great to just kind of build that network of hey, I uplift your posts. Hopefully when I am making my own event too, you'll uplift mine. It's kind of just that friendly networking going on there. And then photos and videos are super important. So photos and videos on any social media site, the algorithm is designed to really uplift those, and especially photos and videos featuring real people. I know that sounds kind of weird, but this is a great graphic that has a lot of information on this workshop Midwest BDC is putting on at our Getting to Zero, at the Getting to Zero forum coming up in May. So it's awesome to include those graphics, but these photos of our coalition members, our staff, our partners actually out in the community, there's something about the algorithm that just really pushes those posts to the top. So usually you will always see photos of people getting more engagement. That's partially partially due to the algorithm, but also partially it's just oh my gosh, Jacob and Marnice hanging out. Like, that's awesome. I like that. I know them. I like them. You know, that's kind of your response as that person who's on social media too. So you're more likely to kind of interact with that, which just, you know, keeps boosting it and keeps kind of bringing it to new eyes and stuff like that. So whenever you're able to kind of use those photos or videos of you, your members, your volunteers actually out doing things in the world, totally recommend doing that whenever you can. And then another question, specifically, this goes to the algorithm, which is something Gregory said he was interested in the chat, is how often you should be posting. So this actually kind of changes all the time. Hootsuite, we'll talk about it a little bit more later in our resources section, but they are essentially a company that does social media. They are a tool for social media posting for companies and organizations, and they are constantly putting out you know, data they've come up with, research they've done. So I got this information from Hootsuite, but it lays out here when you should, or like how often you should be posting on different social media platforms for the algorithm to essentially like you the most. So as you can see, it varies between 2 to 3 times a day on Twitter, TikTok, 3 to 5 times per week, you know, some variance there. These are also not hard and fast rules by any means. If you go over or under this a little bit, it won't make that big of a difference. But I think something important that this gets to is consistency, and it is keeping up on your social media channels. And that's why on that last slide, you know, we highlighted the news, the partner events, uplifting things like that, because probably for most organizations, you are not going to have like something new and exciting you want to make a Facebook post about every single day, but you can fill that time at, you know, you'll have your things, but then also fill in the rest of that space with news that might be interesting to folks interested in your work, resources that'll help them out, partner events you can uplift. So it kind of is like putting all these puzzle pieces together to just make sure you have that consistent presence on social media. If not, the algorithm is just going to kind of push your stuff to the bottom and not show it to as many people. And then one other kind of thing I like to think about when posting on social media is that we are using it as a tool to get people's attention and point them back to where you want them to go. So for us, that is the Midwest BDC website. That's where we have all of our resources, our membership information, orientation information, you know, registering for trainings, our blog, our newsletters. If you want to get a good idea of what Midwest BDC is all about, you want to be on the website. So in almost all of our, you know, social media posts, I'm always linking back to the website. Even if we have a training video that's up on YouTube and on our website, I'm going to link back to the website. So hopefully people go there, watch the training, and then click around a little bit more on the website and just discover more things. So I think that's a really good point, just to always point back to one source. And like, you know, even here, this is my email signature, and we've got midwestdecarb.org. It's like, I want you to go there. I want you to check out what we're all about. And then one other thing on social media that I put in here is if you're on social media for a while, you've probably encountered people who like sometimes are referred to as trolls. So those are accounts that are just like harassing, spamming, cyberbullying others. Oftentimes they're like, that's the only thing they're doing on social media. They won't have any pictures. They won't have any like actual posts. They're just replying to other people's content and like being a jerk essentially. So one of the like pieces of advice I've gotten as I've been working in social media is just like, do not interact with these accounts. It can be tempting, especially if they're saying something that's just like wrong or hurtful to, you know, kind of you want to fire back with like the facts and be like, no, actually you're wrong. But that's kind of just what these folks want. You know, it's just like, you're better off to just like block and not interact with them. But also important note here, some people might have questions or critiques about your work who are actual people. You know, that's an opportunity to respond to them, to be kind, to, you know, answer their question or respond to their critique. But you can definitely usually tell when someone has a genuine question or critique about your mission or your message versus someone who's just like trolling and being a jerk to be a jerk. So just a little point there. If you're on social media for a long time, you will definitely probably run into some people like this. And then our last kind of resource example is a social media toolkit. So social media toolkits are really great when you have a campaign or an event coming up that you really want to promote, and you really want other people to help you promote that. So by writing out sample social media posts and creating graphics, you're making it a lot easier for people in your network to help support you because you're providing them with everything that they need. So important information to include if you're creating a toolkit is the event name, date, time, and place. I wrote event there. It doesn't have to be an event though. Sometimes we see social media toolkits for a new report that's coming out, a new campaign. It can be anything. Any links folks will need to either access that content or register, hashtags to use, partner accounts to tag, and then graphics in that copy and paste content. So on the next slide, we just have an example. This is a toolkit that I made for the 2022 Equity Summit Midwest BDC put on earlier this year. So you can see, thanks so much for supporting us. Please reach out to me if you have any questions. The link to register is right here. The link to our website with more information is right here. Here's a link to download the graphics, but I also included them here if people just want to click and save. And then here is kind of like the copy. So it's just like, pretty much you're just kind of doing the work for folks so that if they want to support you, it's super easy for them to just copy and paste this. I included our links to tag us in here, and it's all done for them. So this is just something where it's like, help me help you. And I would say these toolkits are really useful because, like how we said, sometimes it can be hard to fill out your whole social media schedule for the week. So I know whenever one of these comes through my email inbox from a partner, they're like, hey, we have this event going on. Do you want to help support via this by using this social toolkit? I'm like, yes, I want to do that because that's kind of one less thing that I have to go out and write my own stuff for, make my own graphics. So it's always like kind of a win-win for folks. So it can be a really good tool to help get your word out there about an event or new campaign you're really excited about. All right, so we're going to transition into tools and resources. This will be just really quick before we're getting to Q&A and kind of done with the presentation. But real quick, just wanted to lift up again, if there's any questions on what we just covered, specifically the stuff about social media, feel free to go ahead and put those in the chat or in the Q&A, and I'll answer them right now if any come through, or you can just do it at the end too. But just going to pause for 1 minute there if anyone has any questions right now. All right, and not seeing any at the moment, so I'm going to go through this next section. So tools and resources. Canva is like one of my favorite things that I use for work. This whole presentation was made in Canva. It's a free graphic design resource. They've got a lot of templates that can help spark inspiration. That's something that I found super helpful. So like this is a screenshot of like the main landing page essentially, but here you can see all these different things. So they've got like logos, Instagram posts, flyers, resumes. So if I'm, for example, on those one-pagers, I was like, okay, I got to make a one-pager. I'm going to scroll through and get some inspiration from these ones that already exist on Canva and then use that inspiration to make my own. So I think that can just be super helpful in design, especially if it's just like, all right, you're sitting down and looking at just like a blank page. I don't know what to do. It's kind of that procrastination thing. So it's just really great to spark some inspiration. Some features on Canva you do have to pay for, but you can do a lot with the free version too. So there are some certain functionalities. I think it's some of their graphics that are included, some of their free photos, or the photos that are included are not free. You have to pay for the subscription, but they always have like a free version of things, and then just like you unlock more with the paid subscription. So like I said, you can do a lot with the free version too. And then this little video, it's kind of just like an advertisement for them, honestly. It's 1 minute long, but at the end it shows some of the things you can do with Canva. So I'll just go ahead and play it real quickly.
Graphic design has changed. It's gone from this to this, and it's still not easy. But these Aussies are here to fix design. Starting out in Mel's family living room, then the garage, they never gave up on their mission to empower everyone to design. And so Canva was born. It made design simple, and it took off big time. Every day, over 4 million designs are made by people unleashing their creativity, from students with opinions to moms with a side hustle. Ooh, that's nice. To those crushing it at work. And the designers, they love us too, don't you?
Sure, I use Canva. I mean, it's free. There are millions of premium photos and videos, over 70,000 professional templates to get you started, or you can make your own from scratch. It's so easy. Non-designers can do it.
Non-designers, like Margot. Well, Margot, you have to have a lot of time in your hand. She doesn't. We believe in design for everyone, but don't take it from us. Take it from some of the 20 million people that use Canva every month. This is Mel, Cliff, and Cam, and this is Canva. Create a free account today at canva.com.
All right, sweet. So yeah, that just kind of shows some of the stuff you can do with Canva. I totally recommend it, especially if you are someone who's making flyers, making one-pagers, making stickers, making event advertisements, anything like that. I think it can be super helpful. Another tool that we use all the time is Zoom and Google Meet. This is more of like a community building thing than a pure communications aspect, but you can have a free account on Zoom and a free account on Google Meet as well. They do cap you at the amount of time you can host a free meeting. So I know on Google Meet, it's 1 hour, and on Zoom, it's 40 minutes. So that's a little bit like, can be a bit of a bummer sometimes, but it's a great opportunity, or a great resource to use, especially in this digital age. If you've connected with someone online about your organization or about Midwest BDC, they want to learn a little bit more, just schedule a time, hey, we can jump on a Zoom for half an hour over lunch one day, and you can talk to them more about your mission then. So definitely something to take advantage of. Social media scheduling. This is a little bit more like next steps, I would say, almost like communications 102 if this is 101. But this is a screenshot of Hootsuite, like how I mentioned earlier. So if you are running the social media accounts for an organization, this comes in handy a lot. It lets you schedule posts out. So I can, select, I want to create something that will be posted to Midwest BDC's LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter. I get to write my content here, include the photos, include the links, and then I can schedule for later. So this just makes a big difference in terms of being able to space things out, being able to set up your social media calendar for the week and not having to always, oh shoot, I want to tweet about something right now. Okay, I got to jump on Twitter. I got to do it right now. This lets you kind of set things up ahead of time. So if, like I said, it's a bit of like a next step, it's definitely not something you need by any means, but if you're running social media full time for an organization, it really does come in handy and helps out a lot. It is a paid service, but they do have a nonprofit discount that helps that cost a lot. And then next up, just wanted to put a plug in here for Google. Also, I'm sure you are all like familiar with Google Docs and Google Forms. I just really find myself using both of these tools more and more, though. Google Docs is just so great for collaboration. And then Google Forms, I've actually found, I've just been using that a lot more also. It's really convenient, super easy to set up. And then there's also a way to take all of your form responses, put those into a spreadsheet. It makes outreach really easy. You can have a Google form that's an interest form, and then anyone who fills that out, they're going to be in a spreadsheet. You can grab their email and, reach out to them that way. So those are just 2 tools that I find myself using all of the time. All right, and so that is kind of everything I've got for y'all. So just to recap about all the stuff we went over today. So high level, consistent, recognizable branding helps you build your audience. You're going to want to target different audiences at different times. You're going to want to tailor your message and your outreach according to that. Creating a brand kit and a social media toolkit will make your outreach work easier. Those are both things that, like, the day you're doing them, it can kind of feel like a lot. It might take a little bit of time, but then over the next couple months, it's going to make it so much easier. So I think it's definitely worth it. And social media doesn't need to overwhelm you. There's resources out there to make it more manageable. And also just have fun with it. We talked a little bit about voice and like authenticity. I think that it can feel easy to want, everything you're putting out there online to be perfect and polished. And of course, it's important that like your information is correct, that you're connecting people to the right resources, and you're spending time, checking all of those things. But I think it's also important to just be yourself, like have fun with it. It doesn't have to be scary and overwhelming in a drag all the time. I think having that kind of like lightness and enjoying what you do makes other people more likely to enjoy it also and just be interested in your work. So just something I like to remind myself when I'm stressed out and I'm like, oh my God, I have to post a billion things on social media today. And it's like so much. Just have fun with it. It'll be okay. All right. And so that is really all I've got. Love to open the floor for questions right now. I know we aren't scheduled to end the call until 3 o'clock, so we have some time. And resources, links to these videos, links to the examples, that'll all be coming to your email afterwards today. I'm also going to include a form there for your feedback on this presentation, but then also, like how I said, this is Comms 101. It's kind of just the basics. So I want to get some feedback too on what other specific things you would like to see. I know Gregory put in the chat at the beginning, website design, which is not something I covered in this presentation. So hopefully, in a couple of months, if there's interest, we'll do kind of the next level. We can do a Comms 102. So any of those more specific things that you'd want to see in the future, would love to get that information also. So like I said, I know it was kind of just high level here today. So I'm going to stop talking. And if there are any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat, raise your hand and you can come off of mute, or put them in the Q&A, whatever works.